I never thought it would be her. The one person I trusted completely, the one who knew me better than anyone else in the world, had managed to take everything we'd built and shatter it into pieces I couldn't even begin to pick up. But maybe that's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't come from your enemies. It comes from the ones who swore they'd never hurt you. Mara walked into my life when I wasn't looking for anyone. I was drowning in work, obsessed with finishing my latest project, and relationships weren't even on my radar. But she had this way about her, this light that cut through everything else. She was warm, magnetic, the kind of woman who could make you forget everything else in the room when she smiled. And when she looked at me, it was like she saw something I didn't even see in myself. We met at a networking event, of all places. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I'd planned to work late that night, as usual, but a friend had dragged me out, saying I needed to be around people for once. I hated those kinds of events, hated the small talk and the forced smiles, but the second I saw Mara, all of that faded away. She was standing near the bar, laughing at something the bartender said, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. I don't know what possessed me to walk up to her, but I did, and somehow, we clicked. It was easy, effortless. I didn't have to pretend to be anyone else around her, and that was rare for me. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and the rest happened fast. Within 2 years, she'd moved into my house, and we'd built a life together. Looking back now, I wonder if I was too quick to let her in. Maybe I should have seen the signs earlier, the cracks in her facade. But at the time, it all felt so perfect. I gave her everything, my trust, my time, my heart, and I thought she'd done the same. For a while, it was good. Better than good. We worked well together, balancing each other out in ways that felt natural. I was steady, focused, the planner. She was spontaneous, always pushing me out of my comfort zone. We didn't agree on everything, but when we fought fair. Or so I thought. The first signs were small, easy to dismiss. A missed call she couldn't explain. A work event she forgot to mention. Nights when she'd sit next to me on the couch but felt a million miles away. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. Mara was busy with her real estate career, and I knew how demanding her job could be. She'd always been upfront about that. But then there was the night she left her phone on the kitchen counter. She'd been rushing out the door, saying something about meeting a client downtown, and she must have forgotten it. I didn't think anything of it at first. I figured I'd text her later and let her know she'd left it behind. Then the notification popped up. It was just a message preview, but it stopped me cold. I can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow? The words hung in the air, taunting me, daring me to ignore them. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I told myself it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was from a client, or a coworker, or someone she'd been trying to help. Mara was friendly like that. She had this way of making everyone feel special. But deep down, I already knew the truth. When I finally picked up her phone and opened the messages, it was like stepping into a nightmare. The texts weren't innocent. They were flirtatious, explicit, filled with inside jokes and innuendos that left no room for doubt. He called her babe. She told him she missed him. There were details about their meetings, times, places, even comments about me. "Does he suspect anything?" he'd asked. Her response was like a knife in my gut. "No. He trusts me too much." I wanted to smash the phone against the wall. I wanted to scream, to call her right then and demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the screen, feeling everything I thought I knew unravel. The betrayal wasn't just in what she'd done. It was in the way she'd planned it, the way she'd lied to my face over and over again. Every late work night, every vague excuse, every smile that had hidden the truth, it was all a part of the act. By the time she got home, I'd already put her phone back on the counter. I didn't say anything, didn't even look at her as she kissed me on the cheek and told me she was exhausted. I just nodded, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not without proof. I knew Mara, and I knew she was good at twisting things, at making herself the victim. If I went in without a plan, she'd find a way to turn it around, to make me doubt what I'd seen. No, I needed to be smarter than that. If she wanted to play games, I'd play too, but I'd play to win. I started tracking her location using the shared app we'd set up for emergencies. I watched where she went, cross-referencing her movements with her excuses. It didn't take long to find the patterns. She wasn't meeting clients downtown. She was meeting him at restaurants, hotels, even the park where we used to go for picnics. Each time, I saved screenshots of her location history, building a case she wouldn't be able to deny. I installed a recovery app on her phone, something discreet that let me retrieve deleted messages and calls. What I found only confirmed what I already knew. Their conversations were explicit, filled with things I couldn't unread. He made comments about her body, about their nights together, and she responded with the same emojis and phrases she used with me. It was sickening. But the worst part was when they talked about me. He asked if she was worried I'd find out. Her reply was simple: he trusts me. The arrogance, the audacity of it, made my blood boil. I wanted to confront them both right then and there, but I held back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I started planning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with her phone in front of me, staring at the messages until the words blurred together. Part of me kept hoping there'd be something, anything, to explain it away, a context I'd missed, a detail that would make it all make sense. But there was nothing. Just her lies staring back at me, undeniable and cold. By the time the sun came up, I'd made my decision. If she wanted to build her lies carefully, piece by piece, then I would dismantle them just as meticulously. This wasn't going to be an impulsive blow-up. No shouting match or dramatic scene. If she wanted to play dirty, then I'd beat her at her own game. The next few weeks were a lesson in restraint. Every time she kissed me goodbye or told me she loved me, I had to fight the urge to call her out. Every time she claimed she was working late or meeting a client, I had to bite my tongue. It was maddening, pretending everything was fine when I knew the truth. But I needed her to believe I was oblivious, that I trusted her completely. The more secure she felt, the more careless she'd become. And she did. It wasn't long before the small cracks in her alibi turned into gaping holes. The first slip came on a Thursday evening. Mara claimed she was meeting a new client for drinks at a downtown bar, one she'd been raving about for weeks. I smiled, told her to have fun, and kissed her goodbye. As soon as she left, I pulled up the tracking app on my phone and watched her dot move, not toward downtown, but in the opposite direction. She stopped at a small boutique hotel just outside the city. I parked a few blocks away and waited, the minutes dragging on like hours. Eventually, the door to the hotel opened, and there they were, Mara and Dean. She was laughing, her hand on his arm, looking at him like he was the only person in the world. They disappeared inside together, and I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. That night, I didn't confront her when she came home. I didn't say a word when she slipped into bed next to me, her hair still damp from a quick shower. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster and wondering how long she'd been doing this. The more I watched, the more their routine became clear. Dean wasn't just some fling. He was her partner in crime, someone who had infiltrated our lives so completely that it made me sick to think about it. They met at places I recognized, restaurants Mara and I used to go to, parks where we'd spent lazy Sunday afternoons. It was like she was erasing our memories and replacing them with him. The messages between them became my roadmap. They were bold, almost careless, talking about their plans as if I didn't exist. When Mara texted him, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," I already knew where they'd be. I started documenting everything: photos, videos, timestamps. The evidence piled up, a damning archive of their betrayal. But it wasn't enough to catch them in the act. I wanted to destroy the entire facade, to leave no room for denials or excuses. So, I set a trap. The restaurant was one I knew well. It had been one of Mara's favorites when we first started dating, a place she called our little spot. I hadn't been there in years, but when I suggested we go for dinner one night, her reaction told me everything I needed to know. "That place," she said, her voice tight. "I don't know, it's kind of far, isn't it?" "It's only a 20-minute drive," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I thought you loved it." She hesitated, searching for an excuse. "I do, it's not really my scene anymore, you know?" I let it go, pretending not to notice the way her shoulders relaxed when I agreed to pick somewhere else. But I filed it away, knowing it would come in handy. The night of the trap, I told Mara I had to go out of town for a work meeting. She kissed me goodbye at the door, telling me to drive safe and call her when I got in. I promised I would, then parked my car a block away and waited. Sure enough, an hour later, she left the house dressed to kill, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked to her car. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her pull into the parking lot of the restaurant she'd claimed to outgrow. Dean was already there, waiting for her at a table near the window. They looked so comfortable together, leaning in close and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. It was disgusting. I sat in my car for a long time, watching them through the window. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront them right then and there, to let my anger explode in front of everyone. But I knew that wasn't the way. If I was going to confront her, I needed to do it on my terms. I walked into the restaurant, my heart hammering in my chest. The hostess smiled at me, asking if I had a reservation, but I waved her off. "I'm meeting someone," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I spotted them right away. They were too absorbed in each other to notice me at first. Mara was leaning forward, her hand resting lightly on Dean's, a coy smile playing on her lips. Dean was grinning, hanging on her every word like she was the only thing that mattered. It was almost funny how oblivious they were. Almost. I stopped at their table, letting my shadow fall over them. "Having a good time?" I asked, my voice cold and sharp. Mara froze, her hand hovering midair. Dean looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to panic in the span of a second. Mara's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. "Elliot," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't bother," I said, cutting her off. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table in front of them. The video I'd taken of them through the window played on the screen, their laughter and intimate gestures captured in damning detail. The color drained from Mara's face as she watched. Dean shifted uncomfortably, glancing around like he was looking for an escape route. "You thought I wouldn't find out," I said, my voice low but steady. "You thought you could keep lying to my face and I'd never catch on. Did you really think I was that stupid?" Mara's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. "Elliot, I can explain." "No," I said, cutting her off again. "You can't. Because there's nothing to explain. I've seen enough." Dean tried to speak, his voice weak and stammering. "Look, man, Shut up," I snapped, glaring at him. "You don't get to talk. You knew exactly what you were doing." He shrank back, his confidence completely gone. I turned my attention back to Mara, my voice softer but no less cutting. "I trusted you," I said. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" She started to cry, her tears falling onto the table, but I didn't care. I'd spent weeks drowning in my own pain, and I wasn't about to let her crocodile tears undo me now. "This is over," I said. "You don't get to lie to me anymore. You don't get to manipulate me. You don't get to be a part of my life." With that, I walked away, leaving them sitting there in their guilt and shame. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face, but it felt cleansing. I'd done what I needed to do. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Walking out of that restaurant felt surreal. I'd imagined this moment so many times, rehearsed every word, every glare, every cold dismissal. But now that it had happened, the reality of it hit me differently. It wasn't the satisfaction I'd expected. There was no sense of victory, no relief. Just emptiness, a gaping hole where trust and love used to be. I sat in my car for a while, staring at the dashboard, my mind blank. The storm of anger and hurt that had carried me to that confrontation was gone, leaving only the quiet ache of betrayal. For the first time, it felt real. The woman I'd built my life around had gutted me, and the man I'd once considered a friend had twisted the knife. When I got home, the silence was unbearable. The house, which had once been a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt like a tomb. Every corner held a memory of her, the kitchen where we'd shared late-night snacks, the couch where we'd watched movies, the bedroom where we'd talked about our future. Now, it all felt tainted. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over again. Her tears, her excuses, Dean's pathetic stammering, it was all burned into my mind. But the worst part wasn't the confrontation. It was knowing that even after all of it, she'd probably try to justify herself. She'd find a way to twist the truth, to make herself the victim. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight her again. The next morning, she wasn't home. I didn't know if she'd gone to Dean's place or if she was simply avoiding me, but I didn't care. The house felt lighter without her, though the emptiness still pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. By midday, I got a text from her, "We need to talk. Please." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. What was there to talk about? She'd made her choices, and I'd seen enough to know exactly where I stood. Still, I knew I couldn't ignore her forever. If I wanted to move forward, I had to face this head-on. When she came home that evening, her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Whatever pain she was feeling was nothing compared to what she'd done to me. "Elliot," she said softly, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to come in. "Can we talk?" I didn't say anything, just gestured for her to sit. She moved cautiously, like she was afraid I might explode, but I stayed calm. If there was one thing I'd learned over the past few weeks, it was how to control myself. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I never meant for this to happen." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You never meant for what to happen? The affair? The lies? Or me finding out?" She flinched, but I didn't let up. "You don't get to play the victim here, Mara. You don't get to cry and act like this was some accident. You made a choice. Over and over again. You lied to me, you snuck around, and you thought I'd never figure it out." She looked down, her tears falling silently onto her hands. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I wasn't thinking. Things between us, they weren't the same, and I felt so lost. And Dean, he—" "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't say his name. I don't want to hear it." Her shoulders shook, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a kind of desperate hope. "I love you, Elliot," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I've messed up, but I swear, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just, please don't give up on us." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You love me?" I asked, my voice low and bitter. "Is that what you were thinking when you were with him? When you were texting him, sneaking off to meet him? Did you think about me at all?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "I trusted you, Mara," I said, my voice rising. "I gave you everything. And you threw it away for what? For some asshole who didn't even have the decency to stay away from his brother-in-law's wife?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her voice pleading. "It wasn't about you. It was about me, my insecurities, my fears. I felt like we were drifting apart, like you didn't see me anymore." I laughed again, shaking my head in disbelief. "So this is my fault now? Because I was working to build a life for us? Because I trusted you enough to think you'd talk to me if something was wrong?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the touch of her fingers like poison against my skin. "I don't want to hear it," I said coldly. "Whatever excuses you have, whatever lies you want to tell yourself to make this okay, I don't care. It's over, Mara. You don't get to come back from this." Over the next few days, I began the process of untangling our lives. I packed her belongings into boxes, leaving them in the garage for her to pick up. I called my lawyer, outlining the details of what had happened and asking for advice on how to proceed. Every step felt like tearing out another piece of my heart, but I knew it was the only way forward. Mara tried to reach out several times, sending long messages and leaving voicemails that I didn't bother listening to. She begged for another chance, for a conversation, for anything that might undo the damage she'd caused. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. The house felt different without her. Quieter, emptier, but also lighter. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I started focusing on the things I'd neglected during our relationship, my work, my friends, even myself. It wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of what she'd done threatened to crush me. But I kept moving forward, one step at a time. One evening, I came across an old photo of us. It was from the early days, before the lies and the betrayal, back when everything felt perfect. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a pang of sadness for the version of her I'd fallen in love with. But that version was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And as I put the photo away, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Sad, absolutely. But the anger, the fire that had consumed me for so long, was gone. In its place was something quieter, something stronger. Closure. I was finally ready to let her go. The first night without her was the hardest. The house felt hollow, as though she'd taken more than just her belongings when she left. Even the silence seemed heavier, pressing in on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Every corner of the house felt haunted, by her laughter, her voice, her lies. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where her favorite throw pillow used to be, and for the first time since this all began, I cried. It wasn't just sadness. It was anger, regret, humiliation, a tidal wave of emotions I'd been holding back for weeks. I hated her for what she'd done, for the way she'd destroyed everything we'd built together. But I hated myself, too, for not seeing it sooner. For letting her get away with it for so long. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head throbbed, my throat was raw, and my chest felt heavy, like the weight of everything was sitting there, refusing to move. But I knew I couldn't stay like that. I couldn't let her ruin me. I got up, made coffee, and started cleaning. It wasn't just about tidying up the house, it was about reclaiming it. I threw out the half-empty bottles of her favorite wine, boxed up the trinkets she'd left behind, and rearranged the furniture. It was cathartic, in a way, taking back the space that had once been ours and making it mine again. By the end of the day, the house felt different. Still quiet, still empty, but no longer suffocating. It was a small step, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work. My job had always been my anchor, and now it became my lifeline. I took on extra projects, stayed late at the office, and poured all my energy into creating something tangible, something that couldn't betray me. But even work couldn't completely distract me. Every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about her, wondering if she was with him, if she missed me, if she regretted what she'd done. It was maddening, how she still had a hold on me, even after everything. I hated that she could still occupy my thoughts, that she still had that power over me. That's when I decided to call a therapist. I'd never been the type to talk about my feelings, especially not with a stranger. But I knew I needed help. The anger, the sadness, the constant questioning, it was too much to carry on my own. So, I made an appointment and forced myself to go. The first session was awkward. I sat there, arms crossed, staring at the floor while the therapist, Dr. Hughes, asked gentle, probing questions. At first, I gave her short, clipped answers, not wanting to open up. But as the session went on, something shifted. The words started spilling out, faster than I could stop them. I told her everything, about Mara, about Dean, about the betrayal that had blindsided me. When I finally stopped, my chest felt lighter, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks and was finally exhaling. Dr. Hughes nodded, her expression kind but firm. "Betrayal cuts deep," she said. "It makes you question everything, your partner, your choices, even yourself. But this isn't about what Mara did to you. It's about how you choose to move forward." Move forward. The words stuck with me, echoing in my mind long after I left her office. That's what I needed to do. Not dwell on the past, not let her actions define me. Move forward. The next step was reconnecting with my friends. I'd drifted away from them over the years, too caught up in work and my relationship to make time for anything else. But now, I needed them. I reached out to a few close ones, people I trusted, and told them what had happened. Their reactions were a mix of shock, anger, and support. My best friend, Ryan, practically exploded when I told him. "She cheated on you?" "With her brother-in-law," he said, his voice rising. "What the hell is wrong with her?" I shrugged, feeling a mix of shame and relief. "I don't know, man. I don't think I'll ever understand it." "Well, screw her," he said firmly. "You deserve better. And if you ever need to talk, or drink, just call me." It felt good to have people in my corner, to know I wasn't going through this alone. Slowly, I started spending more time with them, going out for drinks, playing pickup basketball, even just hanging out and talking. It reminded me of who I used to be, before Mara, before everything fell apart. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There were so many memories, vacations, holidays, lazy Sundays on the couch. Each one felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of what I thought we had. But then I came across a photo of myself, taken long before I met her. I was smiling, standing on a hiking trail, the sun setting behind me. I looked happy. Free. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering if I could ever feel like that again. And then I realized something: the man in that photo hadn't needed Mara to be happy. He'd been fine on his own. And maybe, just maybe, I could be that man again. Therapy became a regular part of my routine. Each session with Dr. Hughes was like peeling back another layer, uncovering things I hadn't even realized I was carrying. She helped me see that Mara's betrayal wasn't a reflection of me, it was a reflection of her. Her insecurities, her flaws, her choices. I wasn't to blame for what she'd done. It was a hard lesson to learn, but an important one. For so long, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I could have done something differently. But now, I was starting to see the truth. I deserved better. And I wasn't going to settle for anything less. One day, as I was packing up the last of her things, I came across a note she'd left behind. It was short, just a few lines scrawled on a piece of paper. I know I hurt you. I know I can't fix it. But I'll always love you. I stared at the note for a long time, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, nostalgia. But there was no part of me that wanted to reach out to her, no part that wanted to give her another chance. Whatever love we'd had was gone, and I was done trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. I folded the note and tucked it into the box with the rest of her things. When I handed the box to her a few days later, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. But I didn't give her the chance. I just turned and walked away, leaving her standing there on the porch. That night, I sat on the back deck with a glass of whiskey, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The scars were still there, and the pain hadn't completely faded. But I knew I was on the right path. I was moving forward. And I wasn't looking back. The morning after that quiet evening on the deck, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, there was no lightning bolt of clarity or sudden burst of energy. It was more like a steady hum, a small reminder in the back of my mind that I was still here, still standing. And if I could get through the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss of everything I thought I had, I could get through this too. I started running again. It wasn't about fitness or clearing my head, it was about reclaiming control. Each step felt like a victory over the weight I'd been carrying for weeks. I ran through the streets of our neighborhood, past the houses I used to look at with envy, their perfectly manicured lawns and carefully curated Christmas lights. Those homes used to represent everything I wanted: stability, success, a life with Mara. Now, they felt hollow. Empty shells masking the chaos and pain hidden inside. Work became my anchor. My firm was gearing up for a major project, a high-rise office building in downtown Chicago, and I threw myself into it with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Late nights in the office became my new normal, my laptop screen glowing as I sketched designs and worked through endless revisions. My team noticed the shift. "You're like a machine lately," one of my colleagues said, half joking. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." But I wasn't a machine. I was just someone desperate for something, anything, that felt steady. And work was the only thing that hadn't betrayed me. Mara's name came up less and less. For weeks, I'd been haunted by the whispers, the questions, the looks from people who knew. But as time passed, people moved on. The phone calls from mutual friends dwindled, replaced by texts from old friends I'd reconnected with, people I hadn't seen in years. Ryan was a constant presence, dragging me out for drinks or pick-up basketball games, refusing to let me wallow. He was relentless in his encouragement, but also brutally honest. "You've got to stop letting her live rent-free in your head," he said one night, handing me a beer. "You're not just better off without her, you're thriving. Don't forget that." Therapy sessions with Dr. Hughes continued to peel back layers I hadn't realized I was carrying. We talked about more than just Mara, we talked about my childhood, my fear of failure, the way I'd always put others' needs ahead of my own. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. "What do you want, Elliot?" she asked me one day, leaning forward with that piercing look she always gave when she wanted the truth. "Not what you think you should want, or what someone else told you to want. What do you want?" The question rattled me. For so long, my life had been about Mara, her dreams, her ambitions, her needs. I built everything around her, never stopping to ask myself if that's what I truly wanted. And now, with her gone, I wasn't sure I knew the answer. One night, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old canvas tucked behind a stack of boxes. It was from years ago, back when I used to paint in my free time. I pulled it out, brushing off the dust, and stared at the half-finished landscape, a cabin in the woods, surrounded by trees that faded into the distance. It felt like another life, one I'd forgotten in the chaos of work and relationships. Without thinking, I dug out my old paints and brushes. The colors were dried up, the bristles stiff, but it didn't matter. I sat on the floor, the canvas propped against a wall, and started painting. Hours passed as I lost myself in the strokes, the colors blending together until the image began to take shape again. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. But when I stepped back to look at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. One afternoon, Ryan and I hiked a trail just outside the city. The air was crisp, the kind of cool that wakes you up and makes everything feel sharper. We didn't talk much, just walked in comfortable silence, the sound of leaves crunching under our boots. At the top of the trail, we stopped to catch our breath, the city skyline stretched out in the distance. "This is it," Ryan said, gesturing to the view. "This is life. Not the bullshit with Mara, not the stuff that drags you down. This." I nodded, letting his words sink in. For so long, I'd been stuck in the pain, the anger, the endless replay of everything that had gone wrong. But standing there, looking out at the horizon, I felt something shift again. It wasn't just about letting go of Mara, it was about letting go of the version of myself I'd been with her. The man who tolerated less than he deserved. The man who stayed quiet when he should have spoken up. The man who thought love meant losing yourself. That man was gone. And I wasn't going to miss him. Mara tried reaching out a few more times. A voicemail here, a text there. Each one was a variation of the same theme: apologies, promises to change, pleas for another chance. I didn't respond. Not because I hated her, I didn't. But because I knew there was nothing left to say. I'd given her everything, and she'd thrown it away. That wasn't something we could come back from. One day, I came home to find a letter in the mailbox. It was from her, long, rambling, filled with words I didn't need to read. I opened it anyway, skimming through her explanations and regrets until I reached the end. "I'll always love you, Elliot," she wrote. "And I'll always hate myself for losing you." I folded the letter carefully, placing it in a drawer with the other remnants of our life together. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. But it was closure. The high-rise project I'd been working on finally broke ground, and I found myself standing at the site one morning, watching the construction crew lay the foundation. It was early, the sun just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the ground. I thought about everything I'd been through, everything I'd lost, and everything I was building now. This foundation would be strong. Sturdy. Built to last. Just like me. Life didn't change overnight. Healing wasn't some linear journey, and there were still days when the weight of it all crept up on me. A random memory of Mara's laugh, a familiar song on the radio, or the scent of her old perfume lingering in the depths of the closet, all of it had the potential to crack my newly built armor. But each time it happened, I recovered a little faster. The pain wasn't as sharp, the recovery wasn't as long. Slowly, the ghosts began to fade. One night, I was out with Ryan at a bar we'd frequented back in our college days. The place hadn't changed much: sticky floors, dim lighting, and a jukebox in the corner that still played the same old songs. It was comforting in its way, a reminder of simpler times. We were 2 drinks in when Ryan nudged me. "Don't look now," he said, smirking. "But I think someone's checking you out." I rolled my eyes, shaking my head. "Not interested." "Come on, man," Ryan said, leaning closer. "It's been, what, 6 months? You can't let Mara ruin this for you forever." I followed his gaze, half expecting someone I wouldn't even glance at twice. But when I saw her, my breath caught for just a second. She wasn't glamorous or overly done up like Mara had always been, but there was something about her, a quiet confidence, an ease in the way she carried herself. Her dark curls framed her face, and she had this smile that was infectious, even from across the room. She caught me looking and raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Embarrassed, I looked away, but Ryan groaned dramatically. "Oh, for the love of, just go say hi. What's the worst that could happen?" Her name was Nora, and she was nothing like Mara. Where Mara had been all polished edges and carefully constructed charm, Nora was open, warm, and genuine in a way that made you feel like you'd known her forever. She was a teacher, passionate about her work, with a quick wit that kept me on my toes. We talked for hours that night, her laugh cutting through the noise of the bar like it was meant to be there. By the end of the night, I'd given her my number, half expecting her not to use it. But she did. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Our first few dates were simple. Coffee shops, walks through the park, lazy conversations that felt effortless. I told her about my work, about my love for painting and hiking, about the high-rise project that was slowly becoming my pride and joy. She listened intently, her dark eyes sparkling with genuine interest. But when it came to my past, I kept it vague. I wasn't ready to tell her about Mara, about the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. Not yet. Nora never pushed, though. She seemed to understand that I was still finding my footing, still figuring out who I was without the shadow of my old life hanging over me. It wasn't until our 4th date that she brought it up, gently, carefully. We were sitting on a bench by the lake, the water glittering under the moonlight. "You don't talk much about your past," she said, her tone light but curious. "I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to." I just noticed. I hesitated, my fingers tracing patterns on the bench. "There's not much to say," I said, half-truthfully. I was in a relationship for a while. It ended badly. Nora tilted her head, studying me. "That's fair. I won't pry. But just so you know, you can talk to me. If you ever want to." Her words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was carrying this weight alone, like no one could truly understand what I'd been through. But sitting there with her, I realized that maybe I didn't have to carry it all by myself. A few weeks later, I found myself standing outside a small gallery downtown. One of my old college friends had opened it, and he'd been hounding me for months to check it out. The last time I'd spoken to him, I'd been in the thick of my relationship with Mara, too distracted to care about much else. But now, with my rediscovered love for painting, it felt like the right time. The gallery was small but vibrant, filled with pieces that ranged from abstract explosions of color to quiet, minimalist landscapes. As I wandered through the space, I felt a spark of inspiration I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the art, it was the energy of the place, the way it seemed to hum with possibility. By the time I left, I'd made a decision. I wasn't just going to paint for myself anymore. I was going to create something worth sharing. Something that told my story, not Mara's, not Dean's, not anyone else's. Just mine. Nora became a constant presence in my life, her warmth and humor easing me out of the shell I hadn't realized I'd built around myself. She didn't fill the space Mara had left behind, she created a new one that felt safer, steadier. But I was careful not to rush things. I didn't want her to be a rebound or a distraction. I wanted to do this right. One evening, as we sat on my couch watching a movie, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what's next? Like, where you want to be a year from now? 5 years?" Her question caught me off guard, but I didn't brush it off. I thought about it for a moment, then said, "I want to keep building. Not just in work, but in life. I want to create something real, something that lasts." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "I think you will." The high-rise project was nearing completion, and I found myself spending more and more time at the site, overseeing the final touches. One evening, as the sun set behind the towering structure, I stood on the rooftop and looked out at the city. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder of how far I'd come. I thought about everything that had led me here, the pain, the anger, the betrayal, and realized that I wouldn't trade any of it. As much as it had hurt, it had also shaped me, forcing me to confront parts of myself I might have ignored otherwise. Mara's betrayal had broken me. But it had also set me free. It wasn't until a year after the breakup that I truly felt the weight of everything lift. The scars were still there, faint reminders of what had happened, but they didn't ache the way they used to. I no longer flinched when I heard her name or caught a fleeting scent of her perfume in a crowded room. The memories didn't sting as much, they just existed, like shadows that no longer had the power to darken my world. Nora was a big part of that. She'd become my safe harbor, her steady presence grounding me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. But even with her, there were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I was capable of truly moving on. Betrayal had a way of leaving you second-guessing everything, even yourself. One evening, after dinner at her place, I found myself staring out the window while she cleaned up. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting a soft glow across the room. She walked up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, my hands resting on hers. "Sometimes, I wonder if I'll ever really get past it. What she did, what I let her do. It's like a part of me is still stuck there, waiting for the other shoe to drop." Nora turned me around, her dark eyes serious but kind. "Elliot, you didn't let her do anything. What she did was her choice, not yours. And the fact that you're here, with me, trying to rebuild your life, that says more about who you are than anything she did." Her words settled over me like a balm, soothing the jagged edges of my doubt. I kissed her, pulling her close, and for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could let go. The high-rise project was finally finished, and the grand opening was set for early summer. Standing in the shadow of the gleaming tower, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was my work, my vision, brought to life brick by brick, floor by floor. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of everything I'd overcome. The night before the opening, I invited Nora to the rooftop for a private celebration. We stood together, looking out at the city, the wind tugging at her curls. I handed her a glass of champagne and clinked mine against it. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice steady. She smiled, her eyes shining. To new beginnings. But the past, as I was learning, had a way of lingering. A week after the grand opening, I got a call from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, but when it rang again, something compelled me to pick up. The voice on the other end was shaky, hesitant. "Elliot? It's Mara." Hearing her voice after all this time was like a punch to the gut. I didn't say anything, unsure of how to respond. She took my silence as permission to keep going. I heard about the building. It looks incredible. You've always been so talented. Why are you calling me, Mara? I asked, my voice cold. There was a pause, and then a quiet sigh. I don't know. I guess I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. But instead of the anger or sadness I'd expected to feel, there was only a hollow kind of detachment. She didn't have power over me anymore. I appreciate the apology, I said, keeping my tone neutral. But it doesn't change anything. You made your choices, and I made mine. I've moved on, Mara. You should too. Another pause, and then a soft, I hope you're happy, Elliot. I am, I said simply, before hanging up. It wasn't closure, not exactly. But it was enough. With Mara firmly in my rearview mirror, I threw myself into the next chapter of my life. The gallery I'd visited months ago had invited me to display some of my work in a small exhibit, and I'd accepted. Painting had become more than just a hobby, it was an outlet, a way to channel everything I'd been through into something tangible. The night of the exhibit, Nora stood by my side, her hand in mine as we walked through the gallery. My paintings hung on the walls, each one a reflection of the journey I'd been on. A few people stopped to compliment the work, and though I tried to brush it off, Nora wouldn't let me. Take the compliment, she teased, nudging me. You deserve it. Later, as we stood in front of one of my favorite pieces, a stormy landscape with jagged cliffs and crashing waves, she looked up at me with a soft smile. You've come a long way, she said. I hope you see that. I did. For the first time, I really did. Summer turned to fall, and life continued to shift in ways I hadn't expected. Nora and I grew closer, our lives intertwining in a way that felt effortless. She moved into my place, bringing her warmth and laughter with her, and suddenly the house didn't feel so empty anymore. I found myself thinking about the future in ways I hadn't dared to before. What kind of life we could build together, what kind of man I wanted to be, not just for her, but for myself. The wounds Mara had left were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were just a part of my story, a reminder of how far I'd come. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sunset, Nora turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what you'd say to her? If you could go back to the day it all happened? I considered her question, the weight of it settling over me. I think I'd tell her thank you, I said finally. Not for what she did, but for showing me what I deserved. For giving me the chance to rebuild. Nora nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. You're a better man than most, Elliot. I smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. I'm just a man who learned the hard way. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of finality as the season shifted. Life had a way of marking its chapters without us realizing it, and I could feel one ending now. But this time, it wasn't with pain or regret. It was with clarity and peace. I stood on the rooftop of the high-rise, the building that had become more than just a project to me. It was a testament to everything I'd rebuilt, a physical manifestation of resilience, determination, and hope. Below, the city stretched out in all directions, its streets alive with the hum of life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Life with Nora was easy. Not in the sense that it lacked challenges, but in the way it felt natural, like two pieces of a puzzle that fit without forcing. She didn't demand perfection, didn't ask me to be someone I wasn't. She loved me for who I was, flaws, scars, and all, and that was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. She moved in during the fall, bringing her books, her plants, and her quiet, grounding presence into the space that had once felt suffocating. Now, it felt alive. I'd never been one for sentimentality, but there was something about coming home to her, seeing her curled up on the couch with a book or humming to herself in the kitchen, that made everything else fade away. One night, as we sat by the fireplace with mugs of tea, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about what you'd change? If you could go back?" The question caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate. "Not really," I said. "As much as it hurt, it led me here. And here, this is where I want to be." She smiled, her hand resting on mine. "I'm glad you feel that way. Because I've never been more certain of anything than I am of us." It was the kind of moment I would have taken for granted before. But now, I held on to it, savoring every word, every breath. Mara didn't reach out again after that last phone call, and I was grateful for it. Her chapter in my life was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to a different city, trying to start over. Dean wasn't in the picture anymore. Apparently, their love story had fizzled out once the thrill of secrecy was gone. I didn't feel satisfaction in hearing that. If anything, I felt pity. Not for her, but for the life she'd chosen, the life she'd thrown everything away for. I hoped she found peace, but I knew her journey wasn't mine to worry about anymore. The gallery exhibit turned into something more than I'd expected. My work had resonated with people in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I found myself being approached by collectors and art enthusiasts alike. It wasn't about the recognition, it was about the fact that I'd created something honest, something that came from the deepest parts of me. It felt like a victory, not just over Mara, but over the version of myself that had doubted I could ever heal. One evening, Nora surprised me with a small, framed print of one of my paintings, a stormy seascape I'd created during the darkest days of my recovery. She hung it in our living room, right above the mantel. "It's a reminder," she said when I asked why she chose that one. "Of how far you've come. Of how strong you are." I kissed her, my heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, you know that?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "And you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." A year later, on a snowy December evening, I proposed to Nora. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just the two of us on the same rooftop where we'd toasted to new beginnings. I told her how much she meant to me, how she'd brought light into a life that had felt so dark, and how I couldn't imagine a future without her. She said yes, tears streaming down her face as she laughed and kissed me. It was simple, perfect, and ours. The wedding was small, intimate, filled with the people who had been there through it all. Ryan was my best man, cracking jokes during his speech that had everyone in stitches. Nora looked radiant, her dark curls pinned back and her eyes glowing with happiness. As I stood at the altar, holding her hands and promising her forever, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, whole. Looking back, it was strange to think about how everything had started. Mara's betrayal had felt like the end of the world, a wound so deep I couldn't imagine it ever healing. But now, standing at the edge of this new chapter, I realized it had been the beginning of something far greater. I wasn't the same man I'd been before her. I was stronger, wiser, and more certain of what I deserved. Nora had shown me that love didn't have to be complicated or painful, it could be steady, kind, and real. And I'd learned to love myself in the process, to build a life that was full and meaningful, regardless of who was standing beside me. Years later, as I watched our daughter take her first steps across the living room floor, her laughter filling the house, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the heartbreak, the doubt, it had all been worth it. Because it had led me to this moment, this life, this love. Mara was a ghost now, a distant memory that no longer had the power to haunt me. My life was mine again, and it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. As I scooped my daughter into my arms, Nora watching with that same quiet smile that had captivated me from the start, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. This was my life, messy, imperfect, and absolutely perfect. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I wanted to be.